Hi everyone, this is Arkady Frekhtman. I'm a New York City personal injury trial attorney, and today is February 13th, Tuesday, and it's an interesting episode today because I'm going to be talking about a recent trial. Actually, the trial is still going, and it looks like the jury is about to render a verdict, and I'm watching, and they said the proceeding has not started, so maybe the verdict will come during this video and you can watch it live as it happens, in real time. But I want to tell you a little bit about the case. So basically, it was a one-day trial. It was stipulated. It was in the state of Washington, and it was a trial for a sister for a young woman. She was 29 years old, who was negligently killed because of medical malpractice, a medical negligence and mistake. And surprisingly, the hospital where it happened admitted that they had committed medical malpractice. I've never seen anything like it in my entire legal career, and I've been a lawyer for 25 years, since 1999, when I finished law school and got my admission, and it's 2024, and I've never seen them admit that they committed malpractice, because a medical malpractice case, really, you have to show two things. Number one, that the doctor departed from good and accepted care, good and accepted practice, that they deviated, right, from the standard of care, which is like the lowest common denominator, and that their work is lower than that. So basically that they're not a qualified doctor. And number two, that their mistake is what caused the injuries. But here it's a death case, and I think it was a pretty clear malpractice. So I wanted to just go through some of my notes. I watched some of it. I have to go back and watch everything, but I watched some of the opening, and I really thought the opening statement was excellent. And also I watched some of the witnesses, and then I also watched the closing, some of it. I didn't watch all of it, because even though it's one day, if you watch the whole thing, it's probably like 8 hours, so it takes a long time. So I just, here and there, I tried to watch it. So basically, this is the opening. So the jury selection was not televised on what's known as CVN, which is the Court View Network. So it was not on CVN, the jury selection. But the opening statement, the attorney for the plaintiff, now, so you understand, so the 29-year-old lady was killed negligently, right? It was her brother who brought the case, and he's a sergeant in the military, and he brought the case on behalf of her. And so the lawyer, he basically just said in the opening statement that we need members of the community to make a decision, and you're going to hear the defendant. He actually called the defense lawyer my friend, because I guess they were getting along, and he said, you're going to hear them make arguments and listen to her. She has a job to do. So I think that gives you a lot of credibility, where instead of fighting, you're saying, look, listen to the defense lawyer. They have a job to do. See if what I'm telling you proves to be true or not. So he thanked the jury. He told them to listen to the defense lawyer, and he said, look, we need members of the community to make a decision, and you are those members. And then he said, look, a case can go through litigation, and it can take years and years. But this case, we have this stipulation, this agreement. It's all going to be done in one day. And now he wanted to express the gratitude to the defendant for owning up to what happened. He wanted to thank them, and he wanted to honor that. And he said, but be careful about that, because just because they admit that they committed medical malpractice and they admit liability, that doesn't make the value of the loss any less. The value of his little sister's life, it doesn't make that any less. And he said there's a big difference of belief as to what it should be and what's right, meaning his belief, the plaintiff's belief, and the defendant's belief as to what it's worth. And that's why we need you, the jury. And as you hear the numbers, keep an open mind. Listen to the evidence with your mind, with your hearts, with what you know as human beings. And most importantly, listen to each other in the jury room when you are deliberating. What's right, what's wrong, what's too low, what's cheap. And then he put up a slide, and the slide was We the People, the Declaration of Independence. And he said, look, in this country, we do not have an eye for an eye. That's not the way we do it. So even as divided as our country is right now, it's not the way we do things. We have a system, and that system is to protect fundamental rights that we have as Americans. And those rights include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we want to protect our liberty. We want to protect ourselves against government, against corporations. And then he put up another slide, and he said, look, here the law and the evidence, when you match it up and see what's been lost, when you listen to the human story, when you understand it, when you really listen to it, you're going to say that the range here is from 21 to 42 million. So he gave them a range, a wide range, but still all the numbers in the range are very, very high numbers. 21 million being the lowest and 42 being the highest. And he said, look, these are not crazy numbers. The evidence and law will justify these numbers, and you can choose to say it's worth less or it's worth more, and jurors do that. And why is this such a big deal? And this was almost like a devil's advocate type question, which sometimes works. You can sometimes do that in jury selection. But he said, why is this such a big deal? It's just a 29-year-old sister, right? And at the end of the trial, you're going to understand why. And then he goes into the law and he talks about life expectancy, the damages period being, the damages period is 42 years, the different elements, and that each element should have a separate number of what it's worth. And the first element was loss of love. The second one was loss of care. And he gave examples for each one. He said, for example, loss of care. Well, she, the sister, cared about him greatly. They had a special feeling of love. He felt she loved him more than anything else in the world. No one loved him more than his baby sister. That love filled him up. That love took him across the world to stand up for democracy. It kept him re-enlisting in the military. And he had to go to these horrific places and see these horrific things. Like he saw friends get blown up. And her love was a fuel for him. It filled him up. And the people might say, well, that's priceless. Well, in a court, we have to find a price. And if it's not 100% true value of what it's really worth, then it's an injustice. Less than full justice is an injustice. And then he talked about how the brother had to go to like Afghanistan and Iraq and different countries because he was in the military. Then the next element was loss of companionship, the companionship they felt. Loss of guidance also, that's the fourth element. And he talked about the fact that he kind of like it's called prehabilitation. Like instead of rehabilitation, he prehabbed the jury. And he said, look, he's going to be wearing a uniform because he's in the military. He's going to be wearing a uniform, but he's not wearing the uniform for sympathy. When he gets called to go to court or to a funeral, anything important, he wears that uniform. When anything is important or requires honor, and he earned the right to wear it. And also folks in the military, they're not wealthy. So this is, honestly, they're not out there buying expensive suits. It's the nicest thing he owns, and he's proud to wear it. So he kind of like, said that right up front so that the defense lawyer can't say, oh, you're wearing a suit or a military outfit to try to, garner sympathy. But then going back to guidance, he talked about how the sister would help the brother, that there was one person he would call and say, I don't know, I could get myself up in the morning. I lost one of my buddies. A landmine blew him up. And it's deployment after deployment. She would say, you can do this. She was proud of him and she kept him going. She was his fuel. And the military was his only option. And it's the only option for a lot of people. And then the lawyer like held his, kind of like his own heart because he served in the military. He didn't say I served in the military. I don't think you can do that, but you can kind of tell from his body language that he served in the military too. So that was and maybe somebody on the jury did too. I don't know, but I think that was a powerful moment. He was really good with the jury, really calm, really good speaker. And he said they would talk, the sister who was negligently killed and the brother, they would talk for hours until their phones died. Then they would recharge the phones and talk again. And she helped him get through things no one could help with. And that's why his relationship with her was so special and had such great value. It was companionship. And he talked about the fact that companionship could be through Zoom, or through FaceTime. It doesn't have to be in person. And when at one point the defense lawyer objected because he was talking about the father, I believe, and he said, that's irrelevant. And he said, look, let me move forward and I'll weave it in. I'll explain how it's relevant. And at another point, he had a timeline and he was showing where they all moved and where they were living. And they said they moved to a place in California called Antelope Valley. Does anyone know Antelope Valley? And again, the defense lawyer jumped up and she said, objection. He's like talking to the jurors. And he said, he's just very calm, very positive, not getting flustered by the objections. And he said, it's rhetorical. And so he did a great job, I thought. So he goes back to the PowerPoint. He shows how the brother gets deployed to Afghanistan, Niger, Qatar, Iraq, and every time he comes back to see his sister. And they even have their own special language, their own jokes. And he said, look, you're gonna have to decide what this is worth, the love, the care, the companionship over 42 years. That's what we are here to do. And one of the themes he developed was that the parents were not around. The mother, I believe, passed away, and the father left them early. So the parents weren't around. So all they had was each other. And so this was his baby sister. He's also like not an older guy. He's married actually to the deceased sister's best friend is his wife. And so she would almost be like a marriage counselor. She also testified in the case, the wife. So I thought, it was a really good opening statement. I have to go back and watch it again and maybe take better notes, because these are just a few notes. This isn't the entire opening. The opening lasted about an hour, and I thought it was a very good opening. Then the other part of it was the direct of the sergeant, who was the brother. And he asked questions like, how many years have you served? Did you have any other options? When were you born? Where were you born? And he had an opening statement presentation. He had a lot of demonstratives with photographs from their albums, photographs of him and his sister. They also had like a lot of charts of him going to get deployed in different countries, coming back. And he asked, what was it like growing up with your mom and your dad, to get the story out about the dad leaving and the mom having passed away. And then the parents split up when he was 18 months old. And what was it like growing up from the first you can remember until your sister was born? And he said, well, it was very lonely. It was very hard because the parents split up and he was living with only his mom. And then did that change? And yes, it changed when the sister was born. And what's that picture we're looking at? He showed him a picture. What's that picture? He said, that's me feeding my baby sister. And what's your first memory of her? Well, my first memory is holding her. And how much time did you spend holding her? And then he would give an answer. Did that role get more intense as you grew up? And yeah, he took on a father role, right? Because the father left, the mother passed away. So he took on the father role. The sergeant, the brother, became the father. And he kind of explained that with stories. And how did that feel to be the father, be the older brother, but also have that father role? And he said it just felt amazing because he really loved his baby sister. And so the lawyer said, so you loved her. What was the love from her that you felt? Because remember, she's the one who got negligently killed. So it's the love from her that he lost. So he made it clear, because the defense lawyer brought that up in her opening. She said, well, no, it's not that you can't sue for the love from both of them. It's only the love from her because she's the one who was killed, kind of like a nitpicking technical, but she's right in some ways. So he said, what was the love from her? See, he's like really good on his feet. He listens to what the defense lawyer says, he adopts it, and he like rolls with the punches, which is what a good trial lawyer does. So that's what he asked. What was the love from her, from your sister, that you felt? And he said, unconditional. There was nothing that her big brother could do wrong. And how would you describe your relationship when looking at these pictures? And he showed them a bunch of pictures. Did it change as you got older? And her following you around. And he said, actually, I liked it more as we got older. It got stronger. And what's an example of that? As he's testifying, the lawyer is listening actively, and he's saying, well, okay, thank you for that answer. You said, example, X, Y, Z. What's an example of that following up? A lot of lawyers just like stuck in their notes and just agreeing, okay, but you don't want to do that. You want to be listening. And then he said, did she want you to go to the military? Yes, she did. And then I would ask, how so? And then they talked about that they grew up in a family when there was very little money, and they didn't have enough money to even go to college. And he said, on the level of poverty, where were you? And he said, well, I was a single parent. We had no money. We moved from place to place. We would actually get evicted because we couldn't afford the apartments. And what was the vision for you in going to the military? And he said, well, the vision, the idea of me going to the military was security for me and for my little sister. And he showed a picture of something called Lake Los Angeles. And he said, what was that like? And it's actually a desert town in the middle of nowhere. There is no lake. It's just called that. And then he said, imagine you wanted to get out of there. And he said, yes. Spend part of your life living with your dad? He said, yes. And how'd that work out? He said, that was no good. He didn't have patience for me. And then the dad just left. And then when did you start working? And he talked about when he started working, where he worked, how much money he would make and save. And what did you do? Well, every penny that I made, I would give it to my mother to help care for my sister. And after a number of years, did you get that car? Because his goal was getting a car. And what was it like for your sister when your mom died? How old was your sister? And she was only 13 when his mom died, when their mom died. And you were 20, he was 20, so he's 7 years older. Did your role in her life change? And he said, yes, we actually took a road trip together because my mom died. So we took a road trip together across the country, almost like a movie. You know, they're going to Florida to try to start a new life in Florida. And he even asked, like, who drove? Tell us about the trip. But then what happened was the mom's friend got guardianship, so they had to come back, and the sister went to live with the mom's friend back west. And when you stayed in Florida and she went back to California, did that lessen your relationship? No, it actually got stronger because we saw each other less. And how did you help raise her being in Florida and being in the military? Well, my friends would do welfare checks on her, and it would be like a trust but verify situation. We talked on the phone every few weeks. He would still keep in touch with her even though they were on different coasts. And then he goes back to saying, okay, you joined the military at what age? Where did you do boot camp? What time of year was it? After the boot camp, where did you go? And he said, look, I got deployed to a specific area of the military that if a tank got damaged, that I'd be the guy to put it back together or send it to maintenance, you know, for inspecting it and getting it fixed. And 1 out of 50 people in the military in that division got sent to Iraq, and he was the one. And he said, what guidance did your sister give you to help with this? And she helped center me. She had faith in me because he needed guidance. You know, it's a scary thing. You get sent, you're a young kid, 20 years old, you just did boot camp, you get sent to Iraq. And did you value your relationship based on the amount of times you might call? Because they didn't really call that many times since he was out in Iraq and out getting deployed. And he said, no, that wasn't what we based it on. Because that's another thing the defense lawyer tried to say, well, you don't call each other that often. And he said, well, that's not how we valued our relationship. And one constant in his life was always her. She was always there. Every time we talked, it was like yesterday, like I just talked to her. Even if, you know, he talked to her a year ago, he would remember the conversation and it would be just like it happened yesterday because he was really, really loved his baby sister. And I'm asking you to tally that up. Does that feel good? Meaning tally up the number of times that you talked on the phone. He said, no. Does that correlate in any way to your relationship? No. And how else did she give you guidance? Well, she was a driving force in my life. She was a guiding light. She centered me. She was my cheerleader. And her friend, the best friend of the deceased sister, was actually his wife, right? He married his sister's best friend. So that wife became almost like a marriage counselor. His sister became like a marriage counselor because if he had a fight with his wife, well, he would ask his sister, hey, what should I do? And then the sister would say, okay, because the sister was friends with the wife, so the sister knew the wife really well, she would say how to rectify the relationship. So I thought that was interesting. Just gonna check if the jurors came back. Don't see. Oh, it did. They came back. Okay, the verdict came in. The verdict was for $2,500,000. That's what it says here. Well, that's not a bad verdict, but kind of low. I was hoping, you know, he was asking for a lot more, 21 million to 42 million. Sometimes the verdicts don't come in of what you ask for, but that, you know, you have to just always keep fighting. Still a considerable verdict, 2.5 million. So just going back to my notes, he said, look, when we talked, we would talk about everything and nothing. Sometimes we would talk about our futures. We would talk about what made us happy. We would talk about banter, talking about nothing, talking, you know, he said, I don't want to curse, but talking, he meant talking S-H-I-T. And how much of that was guidance for you? And how much did you depend on her guidance to deal with emotional distress of what you saw overseas? And so he talked about Afghanistan. He talked about, he knew she didn't live the part of, what would you do? Would you, if he, oh, okay, this was a good question. If you knew she didn't live past 29, would you do things differently? He said, yeah, I would go back to Seattle. I would spend time with her. I wouldn't think that she could die at age 29. And were you the only brother to her? And he said, yeah, I'm the only brother. I'm also like a father figure. And did you feel love when she told you that you were like a father figure? He said, yes. Just knowing she was there, does that have value? He said, yes. And then there was a surprise where he came to LAX in California and met her, and they actually recreated that scene, almost like, recreated it. He got up out of the witness box and they recreated the scene. And he said, who put the surprise together? And then the grandfather died, so they had to go to a funeral. And they had planned a cruise together. And they couldn't go to the cruise because she had died around that time, right before the cruise was supposed to happen. And then COVID happened, and she lost her job because she was a sous chef. So she lost her job, money was tight, she couldn't leave because she would get fired. And he also had trouble with money. He got a VA loan. And then the lawyer said, is loss of her guidance, support, care, did that impact your marriage? Did that impact your ability to serve in the military? And he said, yes, he became depressed. He started having problems with his marriage. And the lawyer said, what was her voice like? And then he said, look, her voice was sweet, unique, innocent, feisty, so can anyone fill that void now that she's dead? No, others are just not her. And then there was a bit of a redirect after a cross-examination by the defense lawyer. And yeah, they basically, in the redirect, he kind of fixed all the defense, made some minor points. He fixed those points, and he talked about more photos, saying, look, let's go through these photos. What was that like? Can anything replace this? He said, absolutely not. And then they had another witness, which was his wife, and she talked about how she met the sister, how did that provide guidance, and how's the marriage doing now that the sister is passed away? It's stressful, hard, they're working on it, but they're struggling with it. And then in the closing argument, the lawyer basically said, you are the only people who will be able to write down and say, this is what the doctor's life was worth. I'm sorry, this is what the plaintiff's life was worth in terms of love, care, and companionship. No one else, not the judge, not a politician somewhere. And I hope it's something that you can look back on and be proud of. And then he said the defendant doesn't think it's worth much. And there's no sympathy for the plaintiff, but there's also no sympathy for the defendant. And then there was also a rebuttal closing, but I have to still watch that. But yeah, I thought, it was a good example. It was a good example of using themes, right? Like the theme of if the parents leave, or then all you have is each other, overcoming obstacles, becoming a father figure when you're not really, you're a brother. You're not a father, but you're forced to become a father figure because of your father just leaves, and then losing someone that's really close to you. And I thought it was very well put together and very, very, very powerful. And I know just from reading some of the stuff online that what actually happened was one of the jurors who was older, I think she was like a 78-year-old juror, she said, look, she went on the internet and she started looking up, well, how much do wrongful death cases, how much money should juries award in wrongful death cases? And that's not allowed, right? You have to base it on the evidence in this case. You can't go on the internet and start researching other cases. And she did that, and then another juror actually told on her, so she got removed, and then the juror who told on her also got removed, even though he stood up and did the right thing. So maybe that's one of the reasons the verdict is a little bit low, since the plaintiff was going for 20 to 40, and the verdict came in at 2.5. But, it is what it is. But I thought it's a very interesting case, so I thought I would share some information. I'm going to go back and watch some more parts of the trial, like the opening statement again and the closing argument. and maybe I'll do another video where I talk about some themes that are applicable in your case or in any case, in many cases, right? Not just this case, but themes that can be applicable across the board. It could help a lot of people. Okay, please like and subscribe to our channel. Let us know what questions you have. We are here for you. Our goal is helping serious injury victims and families. If you need a consultation, text me 347-566-9595. Okay, have a great day. Bye-bye.